Hey, what's going on? It's Dr. Mike T. Nelson here with the Flex Diet Certification, Module 1. And this is going to be an overview of the big picture. So for the next several weeks, we're going to take the large kind of 30,000 view, look at the different components, and we'll get down into, more of the details on the different concepts that make up the Flex Diet, and we'll get right into it. So this one for this week is going to be more about the actual system and just a little bit on metabolic flexibility, or MetFlex, as an intro. So what I wanted to do is, within the shortest amount of time, is have all the components to you. So literally after you view the first week's material, you could then start working with clients. And one of the questions that we get all the time, which we'll have much more information coming up, is do you have to be kind of certified, or what can you say with clients? And again, it's not considered legal advice. You'd have to talk to your attorney. But in general, you can work to help educate your clients on nutrition. So pretty much anyone can discuss the different concepts of nutrition, but you're not able to treat any type of disease or do any type of prescription. But as far as I'm able to determine, pretty much everyone, including trainers, coaches, other practitioners, can help work to educate their clients, especially related to health and body composition. So thank you to everyone who purchased. Greatly appreciated. So that's a picture of myself and my wonderful wife, who helps me a lot with the business and everything else. So thank you very much. It is greatly appreciated, and anything we can do to help you out, please let us know. In terms of conflicts of interest, don't really have anything. So I own my own business, which is Extreme Human Performance, where I do consulting, trying to work to fund some more research coming up, various different products, and obviously the one you have here, Flex Diet. I'm the CEO of Extreme Human Performance. There may be a couple affiliate links in here. I've tried to keep those out as much as I can, but for particular things, there may be a couple here and there. So real quickly, what is my background in case you're not familiar? I did a PhD in exercise physiology from the University of Minnesota, looking at metabolic flexibility as a big part of my dissertation. Also did a little work in heart rate variability, or HRV. Started that research in 2006. So it's something that I've been looking at quite in depth for well over a decade now. I was able to work with some clients early on. So I think the early clients I've worked with now have been using the system for well over 8 years. A whole bunch of them are well over 5 years now. So it's not something that I just put together on the back of the envelope a couple of weeks ago and thought I would run a certification on. I presented to DARPA, so the Advanced Research Projects Agency. It's the kind of the independent military funding branch where they do all sorts of crazy research. They've done things you're probably familiar with, such as the GPS, the intranet, used to be called the ARPANET, and a lot of the advanced technology that we have now. So you can look them up on the internet and see some pretty crazy stuff, like them trying to remotely control insects and mount little cameras on them for spying and all sorts of crazy stuff. So I did a presentation to them several years ago on the concept of metabolic flexibility for helping with soldiers. I'm a peer reviewer, do different types of published research. I did a master's in mechanical engineering, which is primarily biomechanics, from Michigan Technological University. Research that I published there was actually on heat transfer, or basically computer modeling of a monkey in the microwave. And then also did a Bachelor of Arts in Natural Science from St. Scholastica in Duluth, Minnesota. So I spent way too long in college. I also did about 5 years in the PhD program in biomedical engineering, but I dropped out of that and went over to do exercise physiology there at the University of Minnesota. As I mentioned, I'm the owner of Extreme Human Performance. I'm a faculty member at the Carrig Institute for Functional Neurology, where we're putting together and have designed a super cool course on human performance. It's about a 300-hour graduate level course. Hit me up if you want any more info on that. And I'm also an instructor online at Rocky Mountain University. So for academics, you can kind of think of this little graphic I put together different colleges that I work for right now, such as the Carrig Institute, Rocky Mountain University. In the past, Michigan Tech, University of Minnesota, St. Scholastica. Helped out with some other books. Helped out with a chapter, one book on supplements. One here talking about dietary protein resistance exercise. So I helped with some of the case studies and scientific literature that was in that book. But you can basically remember me by things that are dark. I like a lot of death metal, and during the day you can buy me a cup of coffee, or in the evening you can buy me a Guinness. Language on this, I'm going to try pretty hard to speak mostly English. Of course, there will be some geeky stuff in here, but we'll take time to explain it to you in terms that you can understand. So my goal is that you'll be able to understand all the material in as much plain language as we can. But I work from the viewpoint of trying to bring each person up to a particular level. So there will be, some technical terms, but we'll take time to explain them so at the end, they'll all make sense to you. So Module 1, big picture. I like this quote from Marcus Aurelius. Object of life is to not be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane. The material presented here, whenever possible, I will have the research usually denoted below each slide. So if you want to go further down those rabbit holes, you definitely can. At the end of all the slides, there'll normally be even more research studies there, so you can definitely check into that. The goal was to take what we have for current research and, in all honesty, extend that a little bit from where it's at. So some of the material will actually not be supported by research, just because some of those studies haven't been done yet. But based on other work and what we understand about physiologic principles, we're going to give you what I believe is the best guess and the best direction. So it is definitely more on the cutting or bleeding edge, but whenever possible, I do like people to ask questions and to challenge different beliefs. So some of this information, again, may not be entirely accepted by the majority, and that's perfectly okay. So Module 1 is the big picture. What exactly is Flex Diet? So it is a combination of two concepts: metabolic flexibility, which we'll talk about, or MetFlex, plus the concept of flexible dieting. So the big two keys to take away from this is metabolic flexibility is how your body uses different types of fuels. And flexible dieting, in real simple terms, is just a flexible approach. Right? Because if we knew exactly what approach worked for everyone, then we would just have them do that particular approach. And what you find, and I'm sure you've found this working with clients already, is that everyone works just a little bit different. Granted, there are physiologic principles that we can apply that work, but everyone is slightly different. So can we take the principles of physiology, especially leveraging metabolic flexibility, and put them into a flexible framework so that it is easier for clients to be compliant? It's easier for them to do what we would like them to do from a nutrition education standpoint, and then put it into their lifestyle that is flexible. And the main goals of this are body composition and also, to a little bit lesser degree, performance. Of course, we can do all sorts of things that will help with body composition, but may have your performance going down over time. That might be all right for short periods of time, but what I found with clients is having them go to the gym all the time and having their performance trending down is incredibly unmotivating, and it is very hard for them to stick with any plan. But if their performance is neutral and kind of slowly going up over time, those are nice markers that they can see going forward, and it is much easier for them to stick with a particular program. So I found that having changes in body composition is what most people are after, or AKA fat loss. But I think performance is a very big component of this that's not talked about a lot, even if the only goal is only body composition. And of course, you've got different sports, you have different types of athletes where body composition is important and performance is important. So if you have any athletes that are in a weight class, the goal is to get the greatest performance you can at a set body weight. And to maximize that, having a better body composition is going to be helpful, again, up to a point. So the goal here is looking at body composition and, a little bit lesser degree, also performance. Oddly enough, I thought this picture was interesting. If you just type diet into the old Google Images search, this is what you get. So that, just try that sometime and see what images pop up, and that'll give you an idea of what most people think about diet for the masses. Another key of the framework here is looking at some form of leverage. And we can argue all day about what is better in terms of physiology or psychology. Now, it might surprise you, but if I could wave my magic wand and change anything with a client that's sitting in front of me, most of the time I would actually pick their psychology or their mental state or their mindset, or whatever word you want to pick with that. The downside of what I've found is that is pretty hard to change. Can you change it? Yes. But I found that process is a little bit longer. We can then have a discussion about doing things that are better to change your physiology. And that's primarily what this course is going to focus on, is more the physiologic changes. But at the end of the day, we can give them all sorts of physiology changes to do, but if they can't execute them, if there are other things in their way, it's not really going to be that effective. So one of the things that took me several months, probably longer, to figure out is, how do we arrange something so that both of these are accounted for? What you find is a lot of systems focus only on one or the other. Hey, this is a really great physiologic tactic or biohack or whatever. Pretty hard for people to do it. So in theory, did you get the physiology right? Absolutely. Can anyone really execute it the way you wanted? Not so much. And we also find on the other side, if they do something, so we convince them that, hey, you need to do this change in order to get the body composition and performance you want. But again, if the physiology is wrong on it, it's not going to work so well. So both of these are important. So what I came up with And I don't think I stole this from anyone, but if anyone can point to a reference beforehand where I did, I'm more than willing to give them credit for it. So the concept of leverage, and here I'm kind of redefining leverage a little bit as the physiologic impact times the change ability. So when we rank these for the interventions that we're going to recommend, we're taking the physiologic impact of that, we're multiplying it by the client's ability to actually execute that physiologic thing that we want them to do, or the intervention that we want them to do. So I'll give you some examples coming up here. And we want to do this because we want to maximize leverage. We want to have them spend their time on the big rocks, the things that are going to move the needle. And if we can stack those things at the start, that's going to be better. All right? But remember, my biased opinion, we have to account for both physiology and the psychology. So how do we do that? We do it by doing what I call leverage system. So this is our physiologic impact, and this is the client's ability to change, or kind of more the psychological impact. So you can probably figure out here that, not giving anything away too much, out of all the things you could do, things that revolve around dietary protein, I believe, and there's good data to support this, have a very high physiologic impact, especially for body composition and performance. We know that if you remove these, both those things tend to go in the wrong direction, right? Yes, you probably could be quite lean by going on a low protein diet, but long term, you're going to start losing muscle mass, you're going to start losing function. You definitely need protein in order to survive. You need essential amino acids, which are the components of protein. So it's definitely very important. On the flip side, it's virtually impossible to overeat on protein and gain fat. You can look up some studies from Dr. Jose Antonio, who's done some great work on this. And even if you feed people shovels full of protein, it's virtually impossible for them to gain fat from overeating protein. So yes, calories in, calories out does matter, but the macronutrient breakdown also matters, right? And I think most people at a base level understand that. If you're eating a diet full of, kind of old school bodybuilding, broccoli and chicken, yeah, it's not the best, but compared to the same number of calories of Twinkies, I'm going to go with the broccoli and the chicken breast. Now, of course, if you were overweight, the famous study of the professor who did the Twinkie diet, yep, you can lose weight, and that by itself can improve body composition and performance, but we don't have to pick one or the other. We can make better choices. Out of all the choices we could make, focusing on protein is going to have a very high physiologic impact. So to anchor the system, I rated this as a 10. For the ability to change, I find that focusing on things for clients to do instead of not do is much more effective. So the example I've used a lot of times is, don't think of a pink elephant. Well, you probably just thought of a pink elephant. So even though I told you, don't think of the pink elephant, right? It's very hard for the human brain that thinks very visually to process the negative. We understand it, but the image of a pink elephant still showed up in your brain, even though I told you, do not think of it. If we emphasize what we want clients to do, especially if we want them to do more of something, we're keeping that visual image in their brain consistent with the action. What I found is that by getting people to eat more protein, vast majority of the time it's something that's relatively easy for them to execute. Of course, there's going to be exceptions, but I find that in practice, it's pretty easy for them to do, right? Especially when you mention the word diet, most people think that you're going to have to dramatically slash their calories, which then makes them think, oh my gosh, I'm just not going to eat anything. I'm going to be living on bird food all day. And when you tell them, hey, you can just eat a crap ton of protein, they're like, wow, really? I mean, I can eat more of something and that's going to be beneficial? Yep. So from a physiologic side, that's going to be better. So I just used that as an anchor and said that's a 10. So our maximum leverage there with protein is going to be 100. Now, if we look at something on the other end of the spectrum, sleep. So is sleep important? Absolutely. If you do not have sleep, at some point, will you die? Absolutely. Can we look at all sorts of different markers associated with sleep? Yep. My buddy, soon-to-be Dr. Dan Party, has done a lot of awesome research on sleep. If we take people and we sleep deprive them for about 5 days, a study from the University of Illinois at Chicago showed that they become borderline type 2 diabetics. These are healthy people that they sleep deprive for only 5 days. I think it was 5 or 7 days, so less than a week. And then once they allowed them to sleep as much as possible, it went away. So from a physiologic standpoint, sleep rates extremely high. The downside is, though, in practice, trying to get people to change their sleep hygiene is not always the easiest thing, especially when you talk about the main drivers of this, which are quantity and quality, as they are for most things. It's pretty hard to get humans to do more of both of those. Now, would there be a massive physiologic change if they did? Absolutely. But in my experience, and there's some literature to support this, the ability for them to change sleep is just not super high. So in terms of a leverage point, it actually rates pretty low. And I've made this mistake in the past where some of the first things I've done with clients was to try to get their sleep to be different. My rationale was looking at the physiology side is, oh, look at all these studies and all this crazy info. Wow, if you do this, you will definitely be better. Your body composition will be better. There's studies showing that fracturing your sleep, where we wake you up once every hour compared to just allowing you to sleep, cuts your body's use of fat by well over 50%. So it cuts that in half just by fracturing or fragmenting your sleep. So from a physiology side, is sleep important? Is it related to body composition and performance? Absolutely. But ability to change is pretty hard for people to do. Therefore, what I like about using a leverage type scale, so if we're going to do an intervention with the client, this is going to be closer to the top. Sleep, unfortunately, is going to be closer to the bottom. Again, not because of physiologic reasons, but because more of the ability to change is much harder. The way the course is set up is these are all in ranked order. As you will notice, protein is number 1, so module 1 is all about protein. And as you can figure out, sleep is going to be much further down the line. Therefore, if you only get through the first part of the course, and of course, pun intended, I want you to go through all of it, but we're weighting the items that are earlier in the course as more important. So the whole thing is set up kind of on a progressive disclosure. Earlier, going to have a higher impact on clients. Oh, and I forgot, this is a really hardcore bottle opener. So again, a form of leverage. How it's set up, we've got the big picture, which is what you're listening to right now or watching. That will drill down into what is the intervention, right? So what is the thing that we want them to do? Now again, the intervention is primarily based on physiology. So things like eating more protein, sleep, etc. But those are listed in the rank order. So earlier ones have a much higher leverage. Again, start at the beginning. And then each one of the interactions, or the interventions I should say, is broken down into 5 specific actions that your client would do. So we have the idea, we have the intervention, and there's a whole video on that talking about the physiology of that particular intervention. So in this module, that's going to be all about protein. So it's about 50 minutes of what you need to know about protein, why it's important, what is it doing in your body, how does it work, what are the things that we need to keep in mind. And then a follow-up video has what are the 5 specific action items related to this intervention. So module 1 is protein, that we want the clients to actually do. So we're going from big picture, a little bit of theory about the intervention, so 1 step down, and then a bunch of smaller steps into actions the clients are actually going to do. Then of course, I'm sure your next question is, well, you gave us 5 action items for the intervention. So module 1 is protein. How do we determine which of those 5 do we actually do? So those are determined by the client. And the method we're going to use is a method that I stole from a concept called motivational interviewing. Super great concept. If you can find the original book, it's really, really good. Probably some of the best stuff I've seen. Boring as sin to read, in my opinion, but I think you can get the book probably still used on Amazon for like $4 or something. Well worth it. But we're just going to steal one concept from that, and this is where the flexible dieting part, or kind of my take on it, comes into play. Because we want the clients to then do kind of the choose your own nutrition adventure. How I think of this is, if you've ever gone bowling, right? So here's your bowling alley, and you can get those little bumpers that they put in the side that they inflate to make sure that your bowling ball stays in the alley. So you as a coach, your job is to kind of inflate these little bumpers and to make sure your client doesn't toss their ball into the lane that's like 2 down or wherever they want to go. But within that lane, you are actually allowing them to kind of little weave and bob back and forth, but they're still going to make it to the end, right? And I found, and there's data to support this also, that by allowing them just this little bit of flexibility, that their compliance is going to be much higher, and also takes into account for how each person is a little bit different. So we're using the concept from motivational interviewing, which we'll explain here, to allow for that flexibility. But again, we're allowing them to stay within this lane, right? So module 1, all the things that have the highest leverage, we're starting there, and these things are going to be protein, right? Because we want to get them the fastest result in the safest manner. So of the 5 action items, and you've got a follow-up video here that'll break down exactly what those are, so you'll know what they are. You're just going to look at them as a coach, and you're going to pick 2 that you think the client will like the most. Now again, you don't necessarily have to be 100% correct on that. It's kind of an auto-correcting system, but you're going to have the best history of the client. You're going to know kind of what they like. You're probably going to have a good like 3-day nutrition log or something to base it on. And you're going to pick 2 and ask the client to compare and rank each one of those. So let's say we've got intervention 1 or 2. The client's going to rate them on a 1 through 10 scale, right? 1 being, oh my gosh, that is like the most horrible idea I've ever heard. I would rather oil wrestle an angry grizzly bear. 10 would be, oh, that is like so easy. I'm just insulted that you actually even want me to do this. I can do this in my sleep. You know, give me some harder stuff to do. All right, and I know that Precision Nutrition, which is done by John Berardi and all the fine folks there, use a lot of concepts from motivational interviewing, which I think is awesome. And if you really enjoy learning more about the ins and outs of habit change along with physiology, and you want to take a much deeper view and over a longer period of time, I would highly recommend their material. It's awesome. So they're going to assign then the higher rank, right? So the client says intervention 2 is a 9, intervention 1, that's like a 5, right? So you're going to give them the thing that they ranked as easier for them to do, right? And you want to rig the system in their favor. Then you track their compliance for 2 weeks. Did they do the thing that they said they could do? And again, we're looking for around a 90% compliance on that. If they can do that, we'll move on to the next item. And don't worry, we will beat this into your head. It gets a little abstract without looking at specifics yet, but we'll always come back to it. How it's broken down is we have 8 different interventions, right? So right now, about 1 per week. There's 5 small action items within each one of those weeks. If the client does, let's say, each one of the 5 actions for 2 weeks, in reality, you have about 80 weeks of nutrition programming. Now that kind of breaks down a little bit since most clients won't do all 5 of the actions. We're shooting for them to hit about 2 to 3 of them. So even if we cut this in half and they only do about half of them, you're still looking at 40 weeks. So almost a year of nutrition programming. So we're looking for only them to do about 2 to 3 actions in each intervention. And again, it's a choose your own adventure. So if you have some times where the action items you get are just not working at all, it's okay to skip ahead a little bit and maybe come back to them later if it's not working. So here's an example. And again, we'll come back to these more examples as we build on this. We'll show you exactly sheets on how you can track it and everything. So don't freak out if this doesn't make a lot of sense right now. My goal is just to present to you the overall picture so that you can start playing around with it with clients as soon as possible. And you have an idea of the framework that you can drop this in as you're watching the other upcoming videos. So they're going to select 2 of the 5 action items. So you as a coach will select those 2 based on what you think are going to be best for the client. So I'm giving away a little bit of the action items here coming up. So we'll say that action item number 1 is a 4x40 approach. So you think that the client could do that. That's pretty high. And you also think, client's kind of a math person. I think they like some math. So maybe they just want the total amount of protein that they need to eat, which the formula for that is 0.7 grams per pound of body weight. And again, we break this all down into the 5 actions video, so you can watch that coming up for all the details. The client then rates and ranks these on a doability scale, as I call it, on a 1 to 10. They say number 1, this 4x40 approach, it's like a 7. I can do it, but not really quite automatic. Number 2, this total amount of protein. I'd say they're a 200-pound individual, so that's 140 grams per day. Yeah, I can do that. That's definitely a 9. Cool. So you're going to assign them number 2, right? We're rigging the system in their favor, right? One of the biggest issues I found with nutrition is compliance. So we're rigging it in their favor. They say, yep, I can do this. This is a 9. Cool. So then we track their compliance on that for 2 weeks with the goal of them to hit 90%. So Don't worry about what happens if they don't hit it, or we can't, find one that they like, or any of the other exceptions for now. We'll definitely get into that later. The goal here is just to show you the overall framework, to give you a specific example so that you can start using this with clients and get some experience by doing, because that's by far and away the best way you're going to learn. And the reality is, if they went from not eating much protein, and even let's say they only hit a 50% compliance, they are still dramatically better than when they started working with you, right? So they're still going in the direction that they want to. Yeah, you could argue maybe it could be improved a little bit, but the goal is progress, not perfection. Physiology is complex, but actions are simple. So as a coach, I view the job is, or if you're a practitioner, to take and understand the physiology, which we're helping you with in this course, and distill it down into the correct actions. And these are rather simple. So those are the ones that the client would then execute. If we go back here and we see in the video, which you'll watch coming up, so 4x40 is just saying, okay, take 4 meals, have 40 grams of protein at each meal. Now we go into the physiology in the previous video, right? So if you go back in time here, we had this intervention video here. We go into all the physiology of how and why that's good. But the client is still executing the specific action here, the 4x40 approach. So that is rather simple. Now I said simple, not necessarily easy, right? Because that's going to take some work on the client and some education and what 40 grams of protein looks like. But at the end of the day, it's rather simple. So the action they're doing is simple. So physiology may be complex. The job of a coach or trainer is to translate that into actions that are simple. And the way this course is designed is you will get both. So you'll learn about the physiology, and we'll give you the action items that you can have the client do. So you'll have both. If you get those questions that are a little bit out of the box, you've got a much better understanding of the physiology, and you're much better able and equipped to give them an answer, which will then translate into a better action. So that's a little bit about the framework there of how the system is set up from an execution standpoint. And that is literally the entire system for execution. So I know it seems a little bit complex, but trust me, it could be infinitely worse. And that's the best I can get it down to so far. And the testing that we've done, it has worked extremely well. So the second part of the framework I wanted to provide to you in this video is just a few minutes on the concept of metabolic flexibility. Metabolic flexibility, the definition, we use that, is the capacity for skeletal muscle to acutely shift its reliance between lipids and glucose during fasting or in response to insulin, such as postprandial conditions. So what the heck does any of that mean in English? We're primarily looking at skeletal muscle. So the thing that is extremely metabolically active in the body. If we're to pick the most metabolically active tissue, it's going to be skeletal muscle, right? And that's the thing clients are also most interested in, right? If you can add more muscle, body composition is probably going to be better. If you could add it without any fat, body composition is definitely going to be better. And also helps with performance. So capacity for skeletal muscle to acutely shift So how well can it move and change its reliance between lipids, which again, we can just think of lipids, fancy word for fats, right? Fat can be a great fuel. And glucose. Can kind of use glucose and carbohydrates a little bit interchangeably. We'll talk more about that coming up. During fasting or in response to insulin, such as postprandial conditions. So during fasting, the definition here of fasting is a period of time where there's no food or calories coming in. So during a period of fasting, we ideally want the body to be using more fats. And during that time, insulin is going to go down. So as insulin goes down, it pushes the body to increase its reliance and use of fat. Now, if you've been fasting, so there's no food coming in or substrate kind of floating around, or that's been minimized, that is primarily going to come from body fat. Again, if you did a couple, shots of olive oil or put a bunch of MCT or something in your coffee, could that be your source of fats during that time under a low insulin condition? Yeah, but that's probably getting a little too far down the rabbit hole for now. So in response to fasting, during fasting or in response to insulin, such as postprandial conditions. So postprandial is just a fancy word for after you eat food. After you eat food, insulin is going to go up. That is going to push your body to primarily be using more carbohydrates as fuel. So again, we're looking at skeletal muscle, how it can shift its reliance between the use of fats and carbohydrates. What are the main things that drive that? The hormonal one is going to be insulin, and the conditions are going to change from fasting, so no food coming in, to postprandial or after food has been coming in. So those are the two cases. A decrease or loss is hypothesized to play a role in various disease processes. And this is from Dr. David Kelly. He's one of the original researchers back in 2000 that coined the term metabolic flexibility. And there was some earlier work such as that from Brooks and Mercier talking about that and the crossover effect. Again, we'll have more on that coming up. But as you lose this metabolic flexibility or you become metabolically inflexible, we see that show up in different disease processes. So one of the main ones is type 2 diabetes. So people who have type 2 diabetes are very metabolically inflexible. They have a very hard time fully using fats when they should, and have a very hard time fully using carbohydrates when they should. And they have a hard time shifting or moving back and forth between those two. What we find is that there is an impaired fat oxidation or burning of fat as a fuel. So a lot of times we don't think about this in, say, type 2 diabetics. Usually that's thought of as a problem with carbohydrates. And while that is definitely true, what we see is over time, as insulin goes up to try to fix, quote unquote, the carbohydrate issue, high levels of insulin then mess up the body's ability to use fat as a fuel. So one of the hallmarks of metabolic inflexibility is impaired fat oxidation. So they are having a much harder time using fat as a fuel. And you can imagine that if your goal is body composition or even sometimes performance, that is not going to be helping you. Now, of course, you can get into the whole calories in, calories out, and different sub-arguments of that. And of course, calories do matter. But in terms of metabolic health, impaired fat oxidation is definitely not good. And I would argue for body composition, it's not going to help you. If we look at it on the spectrum here, last slide, all the way on the right, we have what's called ATP, PC. So ATP is the main cellular currency for the body. We can bind it to this other group, which we'll just name PC for now. Not really politically correct, but phosphocreatine. And this is super high energy rocket fuel. The downside is that it does not last very long at all. If we go down the spectrum here, we can look at carbohydrate use. Now, carbohydrates are still a high energy fuel. If you're doing like sprints, high output glycolytic stuff, if you're doing some metabolic conditioning, maybe some CrossFit stuff, you want to use carbohydrates because you're going to get a lot of speed and power and what's called glycolytic work from that. Fancy word is anaerobic metabolism. The short version is, as we're on the right end of the spectrum, we're getting much more energy out in speed. So the rate at which we can produce ATP, which is the cellular currency. And then as we go down the spectrum, the rate at which we can produce energy actually goes down. So fat, unfortunately, is a rather slow fuel. The positive with fat is that even a lean athlete or lean person has a lot of it. So we've got lots of it stored, much more than we have stored forms of carbohydrate. So again, it's not that fat is better or that carbs are better. It is what are you doing during that time. If you're doing some lower intensity work, you don't have to worry about the rate of producing energy. It doesn't have to be super fast. So therefore, fat is going to be your main fuel. If you're doing some type of Olympic lifting, then you're going to be much closer down here on this end. If you're only maybe doing a couple doubles, yeah, this is going to be your main fuel. Start doing it for a whole bunch of reps, back to back. Carbohydrates are going to be the main fuel there also. So again, metabolic flexibility. How fast can you shift from carbohydrate use to fat use and then back? And that's primarily going to be dependent upon what are you doing at that time. If you're doing high intensity work, you want to be down here on this end of the spectrum. If you're doing more low intensity work, or you're just kind of hanging out watching this video, fat is going to want to be the main fuel source. There's a lot of talk about lactate and ketones. The reason I kind of had these little diagrammed boxes in, ketones kind of are definitely more on the fat end of the spectrum. Where exactly they rate on this end, probably still up for debate. There's some technical issues that make it a little bit of a bugger to measure them in the lab because we can't use what's called the metabolic cart to do that, or it's called indirect calorimetry, which we can use to measure fat and carbohydrate use. There's other ways to get around that, but we'll not worry about that for now. Lactate, or what you've classically heard as lactic acid, which is really lactate plus hydrogen ions, is what's called lactic acid. Although the word even lactic acid just bugs me to no end, because the lactate itself is actually a really good fuel source. Your body loves to use lactate, and to some degree your body really enjoys using ketones also. So lactate, for example, can be pulled up by cardiac tissue, brain tissue, muscle, and it's definitely on the higher end of the spectrum here for creating things that you need more speed and power. So the main part is we're looking here at the two main fuels, which is fat and carbohydrates. So via metabolic flexibility, how far can we go down on this end to using carbs? How far can we go down on this end to really maximize fat use? Again, making sure that it's dependent on the intensity of what we're doing. And then how fast can we switch back and forth as needed. Other fuel sources that are in that area would be lactate and also ketones. And the most high energy fuel here is ATP, PC. Of course, if you want to be uber technical, we're going to have ATP down here, but that's only going to last a couple seconds. So that gives you an idea of taking this information here and putting it into a little bit more graphical form for people who are a little bit more of a visual learner. And we'll give you all the details about how that concept fits into the overall picture. So that's the end of module 1, looking at the overview of the big picture. We talked about the different system of how you're going to take and apply this information, and touched on a little bit of the theory of metabolic flexibility. So check out the other videos and interviews, and thank you very much.